Morning. So the name of this panel is AI and the Disruption of Biochemical R&D, but in fact the topic is much broader than that. So of course AI is going to, we've heard already 100 times, revolutionize all of healthcare. But one of the purposes of this panel is to examine where, in fact, we actually are in the use of AI, not in all of healthcare, but in a couple of different aspects of it, because it really is going to lead to pretty profound change. And yet, I can tell you, it's already led to pretty profound hype. So I'm with a venture capital fund, early stage, and one of the most common pitch decks I get has somewhere in there a slide where there's this arrow, and then there's this rectangle, and in it says proprietary algorithms, and then out the other end is sprinkles and ponies and all sorts of great stuff. And so there's just a lot of hype. So we thought we would assemble a panel that can sort of give us a perspective on what the true state of affairs are. And so with that, Ashwin Gupte, who's the global head of healthcare solutions at Google. David Kapos, you've already met, a partner at Kravitz, Swaine & Moore. Rod McKenzie, who's the executive vice president and chief development officer of Pfizer. And then Prashant Shah, who's the global head of artificial intelligence, health and life sciences for Intel, and as well as now been appointed an AI advisor for the NIH's program of All of Us, Precision Medicine. And so I'd like to welcome all of them, and I'll ask each of them, starting with Ashwin, to give a little perspective on what it is they're working on and their perspective on AI's place in that. So, start.
Thank you. Truly a pleasure to be here today. Ashwin Gupte, in my role, I work with our industry partners, payers, providers, pharma companies, in understanding their digital transformation strategy and how that can be leveraged or augmented with the power of cloud, AI, and open APIs. In Google, I'm from the division called Google Cloud, and that's the mission for our healthcare division is to really empower the organizations that we are working with to help them organize their data and make it accessible, secure, and useful. What it means is we are giving tools to the industry to really manage the data that they have and do amazing things with it. We are doing focus investments in the fields of EHR, EMR. There's a wealth of information from the patient records in EMR. Now you layer in genomics, imaging, other data modalities, patient records. We believe cloud will provide the unprecedented scale to the industry to be able to make sense of that data, and then that will be the gateway to apply artificial intelligence once the data is more normalized, harmonized in providing that infrastructure. So I work in enabling that for the industry.
Excellent. David?
Yeah, so I'm focused on two aspects of AI right now. The first one being the role of data, and the second one being the use cases that, Casey, get beyond the hype that you mentioned and to what is actually in the marketplace and can be in the marketplace in the foreseeable future. As to data, I see data as the new gold. Lots of people are saying that. I believe it really is true. Data is traveling the same path that software traveled 30 years ago. I remember the days when we gave software away to sell mainframe computers. We went from software being a kind of an art to software becoming a science and a discipline in which you could get degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's, and PhD degrees, to becoming its own asset class, the most valuable companies in the world, some of them sitting here, based all and completely on software. Data is traveling that same path from being something we didn't really care about, we didn't really count, we didn't really pay much attention to becoming an asset class. And along the way, there are some really important issues that are coming up because data isn't subject to the same kinds of legal disciplines and protections as other forms of other assets in the IT area like software. Also, data is something that we haven't paid much attention to. Who owns it? Who's got what rights in it? All of your organizations probably have lots and lots of data in them. And when you actually have to sit down and figure out where did you get that data from, what rights do you have in that data, who else has rights in that data, you find out it's very challenging to do that. So data and the issues around data, I think, are really, really seminal in the artificial intelligence area, because it's the data that's driving the AI algorithms, many of which have been very stable, but it's the data coming online that is enabling these really magical developments. And then briefly, secondly, what I call the use cases that are the more tangible ones that we're already seeing in the information technology sector generally and all other sectors. Think about, I think I mentioned before, voice recognition as a very real example. Language translation already out there and working really in terrific ways. And lastly, for this domain, I would mention medical-related uses of AI, such as cross currents and interactions between medicines, where AI is already in play and playing an important role. But there's one final issue that I would mention in this intersection of AI and humans, and that is the human factor. And I point to a study that I'm aware of that looked at the fact that when AI analysis of CT scans was compared with human analysis of CT scans and then human-assisted AI analysis of CT scans, ironically, it turned out that that third category was achieving the worst results. And when the researchers looked behind it, they found out the reason was not because the AI wasn't good and not because the humans weren't good, but because of the interaction between the two. So I think that human-AI interaction is going to be a really important component to pay attention to.
100% agree, and I like the software analogy too. So Rod, if you could give us your perspective.
Sure, thank you, Casey, and good morning, everyone. I think it's great to be with you. My world, as you might imagine, is the world of pharmaceutical R&D. I've spent my whole career in it, and I started off in the research lab as a chemist. And so I've been surrounded by data my whole career, and of course, as you probably know, success rates in pharmaceutical R&D are pretty challenging. And they're challenging, I think, for a fundamental reason, and that is that a lot of the data that we have doesn't necessarily represent what you might call truth when it comes to the biology of disease. And so we're constantly looking for ways to identify signal and amplify it as opposed to just the general noise that's out there, which is rampant in the biological literature and everywhere else. So data, having access to data is not so much of our challenge. How we use it, what insights we get from it, are probably the most important thing that we have to tackle. And I've been around long enough in this business to know that there are every decade or so, there's another thing that's going to solve every problem that we have. And what I've found is they usually don't solve every problem, but they usually solve some problems that we have. And I think AI is another good example of that. My hope for all this area actually is that I spend most of my time trying to increase access to clinical trials, access to healthcare, and trying to reduce healthcare disparities. And so I believe there are opportunities that will come out from AI that really help us to do that. And hopefully I can give you in the discussion one or two examples of where we're trying to do that.
Excellent. And Prashant?
Hi, I'm Prashant. Thanks, Casey, for this introduction. So I work for Intel. I'm the head of AI for health and life sciences. So I work with three main segments. I work with the medical imaging companies, I work with pharma industry, and then I work with the clinical systems. And I'm basically working on a wide variety of AI use cases. So I have a fair bit of understanding where AI can actually help and where there are certain challenges with AI and where there's hype and where there's real work happening. So I hope to bring that perspective to you guys. I also work with NIH on a program called the All of Us program, which is a longitudinal study that was launched in 2016. President Obama kicked this off, and the study was launched a year ago. And the goal of the study is to actually follow 1 million participants through a period of 10 years and sort of collect the clinical data, the genomic data, and the wearable data, and make this data sort of available for researchers from big companies like Pfizer to small citizen scientists. And I really hope that this kind of a resource can actually help the pharma R&D problem that we have right now, because per $1 billion of spending, there are fewer and fewer drugs coming to market. And this is called Eroom's law in the pharma industry, which is actually Moore's law spelled backward. And Moore is, Gordon Moore was one of the founders of Intel, and he had basically predicted that the computation power will basically increase. Every 2 years, it will sort of double, and that computational efficiency will keep driving new and new algorithms. And I think that is a very interesting tie between Eroom's law and Moore's law, because some of the challenges I think can be helped with advanced computation, and AI is actually has been made possible because of some of this computational breakthroughs that have happened in the last decade. So I really look forward to actually talking to this panel and finding out where some of these use cases are being sort of applied, and what we can do to sort of advance this field.
Absolutely. And so I'd remind everybody that you can text questions to us. I get them here on the iPad, and I can ask the panel to respond to that. So this is your chance. You could go ahead and start that process. We'd like this to be a session that goes where you want it to go. So maybe I'll sort of start and pick up on something that Prashant said, and most of you have answered this to some extent in your opening statements, but I'll sort of go down the line again and say, what do you, because I promised the audience a reality check here, what do you think is the biggest challenge that you face in AI in the projects that you're doing?
So let me start with that. As David mentioned, the big, gnarly problem is the data problem. When we are talking to the industry, everyone wants to build AI. They believe it's like kind of pixie dust. You get an AI, and then it's going to fix something. It's harder than that. And the very first step is getting the data really understood. And in healthcare specifically, data is very complicated, right? As I mentioned before, the EMRs and the data that has been gathered over decades has had many different standards. So we talk about HL7 version 1, version 2, the new standard that's FHIR, or now that's just EMR or patient records. Then you layer in the PACS systems or genomics. And there's that belief in the industry, just because you move to a new standard does not mean it is interoperable.
Right.
And so that interoperability is a big problem, making sense and having that backward and forward compatibility to really construct the patient-centric view and connecting the right information at the right time and creating the right intervention is the goal people are embarking on. But the first challenge is data quality.
You're already answering the first question that's come in, which is how do you assure validate, quality of the data?
Right, so data quality, data validation. The second problem in the industry, and when I do talk to the customers, is the skill set on the other side, right? AI is a very relatively new field, and that skill assessment, digital skilling that is needed in the industry for people to be able to make meaningful progress in the AI-based projects. So that's the second challenge that I see in general. And the third is really understanding the business domain. Some problems are right for the AI, where you have the data, that you have ground truth, it's labeled, that you can train the model to solve a problem. Not all problems are AI problems. Certain problems are the data analytics problems. So as an example, I'll ask a question to the audience. Let's say you were given a query of identifying females ages 45 to 55 who have not seen their doctor in past 1 year, have a family history of breast cancer, and by the way, they had BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, and as a provider or a payer, I want to reach out to that community for that intervention to remind them to get their mammogram. That's the statement. Now, how many folks think here you can combine this and ask this query easily today? Raise your hand if there's no AI here. It's reaching out to that population to say that digital intervention, right intervention at the right time. That meant, by the way, I'm combining the AMR data, which is completely different format. I'm getting the payer data membership. When was your last appointment? And then, of course, sifting through the notes, figuring out do you have a family history? So all that becomes very complicated, and understanding where it's analytics versus AI. Yes, AI can go through the notes and figure out and provide the insights, but that's where we are lacking in terms of interoperability. Data is still in the silos, and combining that is super important. So to summarize, 3 issues, and the data standardization, data interoperability, data quality is one. Second, the digital skillings and the training of the workforce to make sense of AI tooling. And the third is understanding the right problem that we can solve with AI and the identification of those use cases.
Excellent. And questions are beginning to roll in, and I think the discussion that we're having is already beginning to answer some of those. So, David, I'll move to you from a legal perspective, or from your perspective. What's the biggest challenge?
Yeah, Casey, interestingly, listening to Ashima, it's exactly the same in the legal domain, data and understanding. I'll start with understanding and come back to data. So I'll give you an example. My day job is doing deals, helping companies buy and sell themselves and help companies buy and sell other companies in the big ticket space, multi-billion-dollar deals. One I'm working on right now that is in this industry, the pharmaceutical industry or the life sciences industry with an AI underpinning to it. We are having a tremendous challenge getting the buyer, and I won't use any names here, which is a very sophisticated research pharmaceutical company, getting the buyer to understand the artificial intelligence component of the deal. It's a pharma company. They understand molecules. They understand treatment regimes and regulatory regimes.
Glad you're looking at me and not at Rod.
Rod, they understand. You guys understand this stuff.
Yes, we
we
do.
talk about Pfizer. But they really struggle with the AI component, the data, the algorithms, and they have no one, frankly, in their company who can handle this. And so they're very reliant on their lawyers, and the lawyers aren't that good at translating these kinds of things. The company itself needs to have that knowledge. So the lack of understanding really resonates, and I'm experiencing the same thing. It impedes deals. It devalues deals, which impacts economic activity, which, of course, none of us wants. Back to data for a moment. Another deal that we finished a few months ago involved, we were helping a US company buy a European AI company that collects gigantic amounts of data through analyzing contracts. So think hundreds of thousands of contracts get analyzed by AI algorithms and then used to be able to predict or to advise companies, typically large companies that have lots and lots and lots of agreements in place to improve their compliance and their operation of their business. As we got into that deal on the buy side, we learned that the seller, which was a European company and much smaller, had really significant issues with understanding the rights in the data, the rights in those contracts that they had collected from their customers, what they could do with that data, what we could do with that data as a purchaser, and on and on and on. And oh, by the way, a subtopic that we haven't yet discussed came up, which is called the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regime, which is a very muscular European law that restricts very tightly what companies can do with data they've collected, personal data they've collected about Europeans. And that issue came up. And so the data issue on the legal vector is just a super important one, and it is affecting the marketplace for strategic transactions between companies.
Excellent. And so, Rod, I'm not only going to ask you to outline what you think the biggest challenge is, but we've already gotten a question in what's the most promising AI use case currently for biopharma R&D? Is it compound screening, clinical trial recruitment, something else? So you mentioned you had some use case scenarios. You could fold that in as well.
Absolutely. So, our biggest challenge is what I mentioned at the beginning, is really detecting signal from the noise that's out there and everything we do, and trying to make predictions of what will happen in the future. And that is a challenge. Interoperability of data and systems is also a big challenge. But let me give you a couple of examples. One, which is me and my colleagues were constantly bombarded with people who claim to have the AI answer to every problem we have. And so we have taken months and months and months to try and figure out who we should be working with and who's got something real and who hasn't got anything real. And so we've come up with a much faster way of doing that, which I think is kind of cool. And we call it the digital accelerator, which is more of an internal phrase for us. But what it does basically is we say, okay, we pick 4 or 5 of these companies who think, and they're all super excited by what they got. We open up to them some of our proprietary data, efficacy data, safety data, in a kind of a protected cloud-based sandbox for them to play in and train their algorithms on our data, and we set them a business problem, a real one, something that we care about. Could be prediction of sites and what will be productive, could be anything really. And we basically let them play there for about 6 weeks. And at the end, we picked the winner, the one that came up with the best result. So I think for us, that was a good way of kind of cutting through the hype, trying to get to people who actually can do things and really can come up with very effective algorithms. And we pick the winners because we're using an outcome that we're measuring rather than the algorithm itself. To some extent, we could care less what the algorithm is. Right. If it produces the outcome we want, then we're interested. And that's probably, when it comes to deals, probably part of the challenge we have, because we're only interested in, for valuation, what's the outcome. The other example is a use case. I would say that there's a recent algorithm. We've just presented it last month, actually, at a conference. And it's to do with prediction of, in an area of transthyretin cardiomyopathy, which is a rare disease, but it's fatal. And it's very poorly diagnosed and very challenging to diagnose. And what we did in collaboration with others at Brigham and Women's and Northwestern, and our own clinicians and scientists, is we came up with an algorithm that really predicts with about 87% predictive power from a whole set of clinical and non-clinical, cardiac, non-cardiac parameters who should be sent for a full diagnosis in this disease. And that's pretty powerful for us because it sorts through all of the noise and creates the signal. So we've published that. We're going to make it broadly available. We hope it helps in diagnosis, which I think is an area that can be really powerful for AI. So there's a couple of examples of what we're trying to do to address this problem of signal and noise.
Excellent. And Prashant, I'll ask you about the challenge, and I'll also throw in there a question that may be best for you from your NIH project perspective, which is, so can you speak more on the topic of they use the example of 1 million people for data. What data would you collect? Where do you choose these people? Where do they come from? How do you sample?
That's a great question. So first I'll talk about the data problem that we've been talking about. Yeah. So data standardization is obviously the key, and one of the biggest problems is that where the data is being generated isn't where the data needs to be used to create these AI models, and there's a big barrier between where the data is being generated versus where AI builders need to be building these models. So having a mechanism by which you can actually share these data sets easily, or there's one central approach is to centralize all these data sets into one giant database or cloud. That's one big sort of approach that is well sort of understood and well validated. There's a second sort of an emerging approach that I'm seeing is federated learning, where you're not actually getting the data to one central place and sort of building your AI models, but you're actually taking the model to the data and training on this, and that sort of touches upon the GDPR and the HIPAA privacy and security rules and regulations that we have to deal with. For sort of important reasons, we have to deal with this. These are like necessary. I'm not saying that these are not necessary, but that does create a barrier from where the data is being generated to where the models need to be built. Second thing, I think I'm hearing a theme in this, that you really need sort of interdisciplinary teams. The computer scientists aren't molecular biologists or the computational chemists. So we need to have these kind of interdisciplinary teams that can work together to sort of identify the problem that you're trying to solve and get the broader picture of the problem, so that you're not solving a very point problem, but you're trying to understand the context in which this problem is being solved. To the NIH question, we are basically collecting. So this particular study is a million participant cohort, where we're not just signing up patients, but also like regular people who are healthy. And this is being done through hospital systems, and there's you can even go to the website and sign up for yourself if you want to. And the goal over here is to actually connect the biosamples. In fact, I just got an email that my saliva collection kit has arrived at my home. So I'll be sending in my biosample. They'll be stored at the Mayo Clinic in a biobank, and they will be doing some sort of advanced genotyping on this. And down the line, they'll be doing sort of whole genome sequencing on this data. They will also collect sort of the EHR data, and they will collect wearable data. So right now, it's Fitbit integration. Soon they will have an Apple Watch integration, and so on and so forth. So the goal of the study is to actually not just study illness, but also study wellness, and sort of understand how wellness then changes into illness and see those patterns. And this data will be obviously anonymized there'll be various levels of security, so that you don't leak your PHI inadvertently. But that's the goal of the study. Right now we have about 200,000 people signed up for the study, and it's just been a year, so it's still in its early stages. But this study was actually inspired by the Framingham study in the 1940s, and that study actually led to a lot of breakthroughs in cardiac research. So this study is not really focused on a single disease type, but it's a longitudinal study that can be used for various diseases.
Excellent. So David, I've got a legal question for you. We've got one question that came in, and actually it says, assumes that with AI derives inventions, AI would be the inventor, but I'm going to ask you, is that actually true?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And we're talking a lot about that in legal circles. What about when artificial intelligence is the inventor? There have been at least one, and I think a few patent applications filed in the UK recently, where an artificial intelligence algorithm and its data set were claimed as the inventor. But that's really on the extreme fringe for now, and will be for the foreseeable future rare. And some of the other speakers are probably better positioned to tell you about the ability of AI to actually invent, to demonstrate that level of human creativity.
Right.
I think it's fair to say it's very limited, but it will come in the future. And there will be a day in the future when, like we've seen artificial intelligence algorithms that are composing music. I think it might have been some Asian company recently finished off a classical composition.
Yeah, Bach, yeah.
Yeah, that was the famous unfinished composition, and some would say it sounds pretty good. There was an artificial intelligence created painting that sold at auction. I think it might have been in New York or London recently for a lot of money. So some would say that AI-based creativity is already here. It will, of course, improve. there will be AI-based inventions, and we'll have to grapple with those. There's no inherent reason in the IP field why an artificial intelligence algorithm can't be an inventor. There are some nuances to work out. But I would finish by saying, for the foreseeable future, the inventors will remain the scientists who design the algorithms, who bring together the insights and the data and do all the work to bring the data and the algorithms together and to ask the right questions.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would like to add on that, people say that data plus AI is equal to science, and it is not science, right? It's a tool for science. It's not.
Absolutely.
It's not science by itself.
No, and that's a point well worth making. So we've had a couple of questions. I'll give Ashima this the first crack, but I'd welcome other comments as well. And I'm sure you get this question a lot, which is sort of concerns around, everybody's touched on it, the protection of the data. Mm-hmm. And so we've had a couple of questions, says the data owners, the people who they say in most cases unknowingly agrees to let companies use it. And so what is protected and what should be done to keep those protections? And we already have touched on some of those regulations, but
yeah, I think that's a great question. When we work with, let's say, a provider system, or in that case, the data belongs to, they are the custodian on behalf of the patients and owning that data. The provider organization today are doing a lot of research, of course, with the patient consent. They are a HIPAA compliant entity. And in that framework, they leverage that data for the advancement, for the better patient care and improving the outcomes. So there's a big debate in the industry who owns the data. Of course, consumers own the data, but there are custodians in place. So for example, if you go to a hospital and that's my physician, they're holding the data on my behalf. And the 21st Century Cures Act is now mandating that the data belongs to the consumer and to have an API level access to that data. Meaning as a consumer, I can access and ask for my data as an API, and that's the new wave that's coming in. And as a patient, as a consumer, I applaud that. I believe a patient should have access to their data, leveraging interoperable APIs, so that I can then take my data and then maybe second opinion, or I'm combining multiple different providers that I'm going to and creating that longitudinal record myself. But today, those APIs and that open interoperable ecosystem is not fully in place. The regulations are coming in terms of the Information Blocking Act. It's open for comments for folks. I also want to say from the provider perspective, when they're getting those new sets of data, for example, we mentioned Fitbit, we mentioned glucose meters, and getting this patient-generated data that's coming into a clinical workflow, there's also this lack of standardization. How do you, when you got the data, you build the AI model, how you now bring that into the clinical workflow so that you can service it even for the providers and do it meaningfully for the consumers. How many people here think they need more data, right? People need more insights, they need more information. So to me, it's a more insight and an information question, and of course, this interoperability in play. So I think there are two different things in play here.
Yeah, this is a very messy topic, right? Who owns the data? I mean, if I get a CT scan at a particular radiology center, does the radiology center, can they use that data to create new models? And that's a very sort of a tricky subject to touch upon without the patient's consent, right? So that's something that is very tricky to touch upon. But there's another movement that I'm seeing that is happening, which is volunteer data. People are volunteering their data for the advancement of science. So the Broad Institute has this Count Me In program where you can sort of donate your data for like genomic research. And there are a spectrum of people, some people who are really concerned about their privacy, and rightfully so. And then there are a spectrum of people who believe that their data can be and should be used as a donation, for like donation, and be able to use that for creating of these new AI models. And I think we need to be sensitive to the needs of this entire population, not just people who are very, very concerned about privacy, or people who are like me, who don't mind sharing my data, right? So
Excellent. So I'm going to sort of take this question because I think it's been touched upon, and also because our fund does investing in healthcare services, so we deal a lot with healthcare systems and things. And it's why is healthcare so far behind other industries when it comes to applications of AI? Have we focused too much on the complex patient-facing areas rather than the unsexy back office processes? Well, I think the first thing is I don't know that healthcare is that far behind on the use of AI, but we've tried to put it into places where you really need that power. Ashma already mentioned many things are not an AI question, and back office processes in many healthcare systems isn't so much an AI problem. It's our general healthcare system is still is the only place that requires you to fax something to them. So it's it's often the problem is not amenable to AI. So just in the last few seconds here, I'm going to ask Rod to tell us, this is the zinger question. There's been a lot of capital into this AI into healthcare technologies, but we don't know if it's had an impact yet. When are we going to know that?
Well, I think to your point on the back office, we haven't really talked a lot about this. There's a tremendous amount of efficiencies being gained right now, because one of the big strengths of AI is pattern recognition. In fact, many people would say that's really what AI is. It's pattern recognition. And in the drug discovery process, for example, we're all about pattern recognition. Every single study that's ever been done as part of a drug discovery program creates histology slides, for example. And it's been read for generations down a microscope by a human being. It's perfect for AI to come in and make super efficient. The same's true with video. And more or less any data set that spews out time and time again, and you're trying to detect the difference between normal and abnormal. And so there's lots of that going on in the past, which is shrinking. So what's the benefit? Well, the benefit is speed. In our world, it takes a very long time to go from a laboratory to the marketplace. Maybe it's up to 10 years, 12 years. Well, all of these little pieces add up, and AI is actually having quite a significant impact on some of these times that we take to do programs. So you'll see that, I think, coming through in faster times for the processes. And just for Prashant, you should also keep an eye out for a publication from the Boston Consulting Group, because you might be surprised what the industry's been able to do with e-room.
yeah,
Ooh,
So-
a teaser.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're at the end of our time, and I hope that you'll all join me in thanking our panelists.